Hello and welcome to Nature Day's Outdoor Learning Resources. My challenge for you today is to do some dissection of some summer flowers. So again, if you've got lots of flowers in your garden or you can find some in your local area, make sure you get permission. But I want you to find one and we're going to dissect it together and see if we can identify all the different parts and find out what they're for. So in my garden, I've got a lovely foxglove. And here you can see all the flowers. Now the amazing things about foxgloves is they have a succession of flowers starting all the way down here, the beginning of the summer, and then as it gets later and later on, more of these flowers will come in to bud, well from bud go into flower, and then they will turn into seed. So you can see how far summer has progressed as to how many the flowers have been opened and how many there are left. So if you look at mine, there's still quite a few ready that haven't burst into flower yet, so we've still got some of the summer left. And it shows us the whole of the life cycle of this flower as we go from the bottom of the spike up to the top. So I'm going to focus on the foxglove to show you the flowers. So I've got some flowers that have fallen off here, which have come from these lower ones, which have now turned into seed. So let's have a closer look at one of these. So let's start with the shape. Now, why do flowers have a shape? Why aren't they just all the same? Now, they're trying to get the pollinator, so the bee or the butterfly, to actually enter into their flower so that they can rub against the pollen, and then they'll take the pollen with them to another flower to pollinate it. And the reason they're going to go inside here is because at the back here you're going to have some kind of nectar which is going to provide a sweet little drink for our pollinators, which forces them to come in. So that's why these ones are this weird shape, this funnel shape, to push the pollinators all the way in before they get their drink. So we're going to take away this petal so we can see what's inside. So I'm just going to rip it open like that so we can see what's inside our flower. Now, if you haven't got a funnel shaped flower, you may not have to rip it open to see all the parts. But there we go. And now we can see where the pollen is held. So all flowers that have got pollen will have the male part here sticking out on probably something like this. These are called the anther. Okay, so the anther has got this stalk here that holds it out from the plant, and at the very top we have got our pollen containing bit. So at the very top you'll probably have a darker colour or a yellower colour, and you can tell it's got pollen if it's ripe. If you rub your finger on it, you'll probably see some bits of pollen on your finger. However, this was on the ground, so this has actually used up all its pollen. All the pollen's gone. So if I rub against it, I can't actually get any pollen because it's all been taken by the pollinators. Now, those are usually around the outside of our petals. And then in the centre bit, you then usually have the female part. If I show you on my flower that is still attached, this is where my flower that I had on the ground was. And this that's been left behind is our female part. This is our stigma at the top, the sticky bit there, and then the long line there is the style. So that's our female part, and that's in the centre. So if we look inside these flowers here, hopefully you can see at the top there we've got our pollen carrying anther, the male part. And what happens is when the flower first ripens, it has the anther, so that when a bee or a pollinator comes to our flower, it goes inside, rubs against that anther, and when it comes out again it'll have pollen on top of its fluffy legs or its fluffy body, and then it will fly off to another ripe flower. However, these ripe flowers here are all males at the moment, and the ones underneath were female. So you can see that the anther is missing because it's fallen down, but we've still got that sticky stigma. So that means that we find it very difficult to have the pollen from one flower on this foxglove going to another of the flowers on the same foxglove, because we haven't got the male and female open at the same time. So this flower, the pollen from this flower, will have to be taken to another foxglove in order to cross-pollinate. And that means you get better offspring because they're not clones of the same flower. Because if this pollen from this flower here went on to this stigma here, then the seeds that would be created at the bottom of this flower would not have any variability. They would not be genetically different from this flower. And if this flower was susceptible to something like frost or bugs or some disease, then these babies would also have the same problem. So they always want to mix it up, make it a bit more variety, and that means they want to spread their pollen to another flower. So once our pollen has been all taken away, then of course we don't actually require this petal anymore, because the pollen is being taken by, oh, there you can see. So the pollen has been taken by our pollinator, and the pollinator is retracted by this lovely colour and the nectar. So once the pollen has been put onto the stigma can be left behind, but we don't need our petals, so it falls down. So once the pollen has landed on the end of the stigma here, it will then grow a pollen tube down the style all the way to the end of the flower, which is where the ovum is and the ovary. So inside here, we have the female part, the egg or the ovum, and then when the pollen grain fuses with it, you get fertilization and we start to grow a seed. And so if you look further down your foxglove, you can see the next stage, which is when our stigma, which has done its job and style there, is basically died. So this is no longer needed. And then underneath it, you will see a developing seed. So this seed is getting bigger and bigger. And then eventually you will have a ripe seed, which you probably don't quite have yet at the bottom of this. But the seed will be hard. Oh, there you go. There's a ripe seed there. There we go. And a seed there is at the very bottom of where the flower was. The flower would have been at this end here. And that, when it's ripe, will be fired off into the ground around it and will grow into a new, very similar but not exactly the same foxglove. So have a look around your garden or around anywhere you can see some flowers. You don't have to destroy the flowers to be able to see those parts, but see if you can identify where the pollinators come in, where they land, where the anther is, where the pollen is, how the pollinator comes in and gets that onto its body. If you can find the nectary, that's fantastic. If you've got honeysuckle, these ones here, which are great for pollinators, then these are great ones to also have a look at. So you can see sticking out, you've got our pollen on the outside, sticky stigma in the middle, landing platform for our pollinator, and again we've got a long tube here to force the pollinator to push past the pollen before it actually gets a drink. And if you pull one of these off, there you go. If you look on the bottom, so that's where the ovary is. But what you can do is you can snip the end off like that, and there you can see the other end of the style. But here, the very tip is where the nectar is. You can actually suck that and taste the nectar. Lovely little shot of sugar. So that is what our pollinators are looking for. Now, it's not good for the flower to do that, of course, because it hasn't been pollinated. But honeysuckle, great ones you can have a look at. It's a sticky stigma, and then these are the anther with all the pollen, either side again. These have run out of pollen, so they're coming to the end of their life. The stigma is still sticky there, ready for any more pollen. And then this at the bottom will turn into our seed. So see if you can do some identification of the bits of the dissected flower that you've got. So look for the anther with the pollen on it, the sticky stigma, the style, the long line coming from the stigma all the way to the ovum. See if you can see the ovum or the tiny little immature eggs which will turn into the seed, and then watch it, and in a few weeks' time or in maybe a few days' time, they will turn into your fruits. And again, the fruit will be different depending on what you've got. So if you've got peas in your garden, your fruits will be in a pod. Have a look at pea flowers. If you've got them, they're fantastic because you can have a little landing platform that actually goes down, and as the landing platform goes down, this actual anther bend down to cover the pollinator in pollen. So here's a pea flower here. So if I come in and pretend to be a pollinator, I land on the platform here, and as I push down, this one isn't mature enough, but if this was ready, then the anther would actually flick down and cover me with pollen. If you look at the Nature Days blog, you can see a picture which has got the labels, and you could see if you could try and use those labels to actually draw a picture of your dissected flower. Now, some flowers are easier than others. Things like buddleia, very, very tiny flowers, quite hard to see things. Some flowers that you might think are simple are actually quite complicated. Things like daisies and dandelions, they've actually got, especially dandelions, I've got lots and lots and lots of flowers inside those. Each petal has got a flower associated with it. So you'll find lots and lots of stigma and lots of anther. So there's a lot to look at there. Some flowers that you know very well are actually quite complicated. So have a look round, see if you can identify those main points. And I'd love to see any photos of your annotated photos. So say you get a photo, you could then label it with all those parts that I've mentioned or that are in the picture on the blog. I'd love to see any pictures that you generate. So please do tweet them, #NatureDays or @DawnNatureDays, or you could put them on the Facebook page. So on the Nature Days Facebook page. And enjoy the flowers of your garden.